Hello and welcome to this Wired briefing on Agentic AI and what businesses need to know. I'm Charlie Burton. I'm the Director of Content at Wired's Consulting Division, and I'm delighted to be here today with two experts from the technology consultancy ThoughtWorks to discuss what has arguably become the biggest topic in enterprise tech right now. I thought I'd start off with a quick bit of framing about why this is such a hot topic. The promise of agentic AI is that it's AI that doesn't just give you an answer, but can actually do something for you. So it can operate digital tools to achieve a goal on your behalf. And so for businesses, that basically means there's the potential to automate a whole class of tasks that were previously out of scope for traditional, brittle RPA, robotic process automation systems. So there's a big automation opportunity here. And of course, lots of executives want that. But I think once they start reading into it, a lot of businesses get a bit puzzled. On the one hand, they're told that everyone is doing agents. 2025 was apparently the year of agents. It looks like 2026 might just be as well. Every software company, tech exec, LinkedIn pundit seems to be talking about them. We have loads of businesses claiming they're using them, some saying they've got more than 10,000 agents working in their company on a regular basis. Yet at the same time, there's also all these highly credentialized research papers, reports, commentators saying these things just aren't ready for prime time in professional environments. AI agents are buggy, they have really high failure rates, particularly in like workplace tasks. They create serious security vulnerabilities. Andre Karpathy, one of the original OpenAI co-founders, gave an interview recently where he said, they just don't work. So I think business leaders are rightly asking, okay, so are these things real or not? You know, is this all just vaporware and marketing flim-flam? Or is there some version of this that is useful? And if there is, what is it? And how do I do it? So to untangle these questions, we recently partnered with ThoughtWorks on a new report about agents, what's working, what's failing, where it might go next. And you can read that on wired.com right now. We'll put a link to that at the end of this video. But joining us today to drill down on those ideas and bring a more practical dimension to the discussion as well are Rachel Laycock, Chief Technology Officer at ThoughtWorks, and Cheyenne Mohanty, Chief Data and AI Officer at ThoughtWorks. So thank you both very much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
I want to start off with just level setting on some of the basics here, because I think there's enough confusion around even the definitions. Like, I think part of the problem, as with a lot of AI, is that the terminology can be a bit misleading. It's quite anthropomorphic. Like agent implies some kind of intelligent entity, you know. So I wonder if we can just demystify this whole thing, like in a very literal technical sense. So we actually get a clear picture of what we're talking about here on like a software level, because it's not magic. Like, what actually is an agent? Like, Cheyenne, can you just talk us through what we're dealing with here?
Yeah. So I'll talk about what an agent is, and I'll also compare it to some alternatives like copilots and things like that. So I think it's easiest to kind of break it down into its constituent functionalities. In general, like the punchline is that an agent is really an AI-powered thing, and I'll use that term very broadly. I'll talk a little bit more about what that actually means, that acts in a loop against a goal to achieve an outcome. And it might use tools, it could plan its actions, it will run for some period of time. But the whole point is that it essentially has broad direction, and it has an internal way of assessing the path to get to an outcome. And it evaluates, has it achieved that outcome or not? And it terminates once it's achieved the outcome. On the other hand, something like a copilot is something that is ultimately initiated by a human. So you might have a chatbot type of interface and be like, can you go create this like CRM ticket for me? This opportunity, this this lead or something, or you might be engaging with some other type of system. It is a much smaller footprint. It is initiated by a human. It might do, small number of turns in a conversation. It might use some set of tools, but ultimately it's not self-directed, right? It's not trying to align to a goal, to a particular outcome. It is very much almost an order taker in a lot of ways. Whereas on the other hand, an agent by definition is meant to have agency. Uh, but under the hood, what I guess like one of the other punchlines here is that you can't think of an agent as an opaque thing that is one size fits all. Like not all agents are the same. Internally, they're all built very differently, and there's lots of places where things can go wrong. So that's where some amount of brittleness, some amount of like sentiment of things are not working might come from. It's the technology is kind of nascent at the moment.
In your estimation, like knowing the industry as you do, what proportion of deployed agents would you say actually meet the definition you've laid out versus really just being like an automated workflow based on if-then statements?
I mean, practically, I would say that most things that people call agents are not what I would consider true agents. But then also, like, we also have to true up the fact that the definition has been shifting for a while. Like, I was in this meeting with OpenAI over a year ago where the same sort of question was posed to the entire room. It was like, how many of you have seen agents in production? And initially, everyone's hands raised. This is over a year ago, right? And then they all came back down because everyone thought a little bit and they were like, okay, actually, what I saw was not what I would consider an agent, something that can truly plan and execute to a goal and terminate in a way that makes sense. So I would say that, like, proportionally speaking, something to the order of like 70 to 80% of what's out there are not true agents. And what's more is that the remaining 20% are kind of recycled use cases with a very limited blast radius. Things that are fairly, I wouldn't say trivial, but they're the same use cases over and over again because people want to limit the risk in introducing agents into their systems.
You've given a great explanation of what they are. But Rachel, can I ask you, why did these things suddenly become so massive last year specifically? Like, what changed?
Well, I think it's a great question, Charlie. And going back to Cheyenne's point, I think we're not quite there in terms of what the goals are of agents, but a lot of the things that people are building over the last year is a step in that direction, which is helping people learn what they can do or what the technology can currently do and where the limitations are. And the reason for that is first of all, the models just got better at like reasoning and planning and following more complex instructions. I mean, I think we all experienced that, whether you were using ChatGPT or Gemini or something else, that just your ability to do like one shot and get better results improved. And now that with things like, I built a gem, for example, the other week that helped me with some research, right? You can do more and more things in this space. The other side of it is the tooling is starting to mature. So you've got, MCP has been introduced, you've got agent to agent as a protocol. And then alongside that, and I think this is actually where you get a lot of those almost agents, but not quite, is a lot of the vendors launched the ability to build low code agents, right? So things like the OpenAI agent builder, I mentioned gems that I've been using. We were really heavy users of Glean Enterprise very early on for knowledge management. I think knowledge management is an issue that every organization I've worked in, no matter industry, has challenges with. And so we were just heavy users of that. And then immediately you start building out agents for building out, agent. I'll use the term loosely at this point, but like for building out RFPs and just like things that were maybe more challenging. And as you said, Charlie, harder to do in more, other workflows that we had in the past and other types of automation that we had in the past. And then I think the other thing that made it kind of have a bigger impact is more on the flip side, which is, the security concerns, right? I think the lethal trifecta has become quite popular, right? The idea that you can, or not popular, but has become quite well known, right? So this ability to access private data and having untrusted content and having, external communication. And it's very easy to do that, right? Which is why shadow AI is so dangerous and so problematic, is that if your security and IT teams aren't across that, it can create a lot of issues. And then, of course, we've got the cost overruns, the projected costs of like building out these things versus where we actually landed, and is kind of scary. And there's been many use cases out there. But even in my team, with the tools that we've built, just in the coding workflow space, the cost of tokens is twice as much as what we predicted. And so I think there's a bunch of different, both like positive and challenging reasons why it's been kind of front page news, not just what you can now do much more easily, but also what are the risks and concerns that come alongside that. But to me, the biggest thing, and maybe I'm a little biased because I'm a CTO, is the amount of focus that's been put on the software delivery cycle. Right, that's actually the use case that I've seen most heavily, people looking at agentic workflows. And that's really, those tools have moved from, basically really good autocomplete to build me a testing agent, build me a code review agent, and having all these different agents that allow people, at least in the greenfield space, to build software very quickly. But as Cheyenne said, you very quickly hit limits with that, it very quickly struggles with the size of the context after you get your code base to a certain size. So I think that heavy usage in that space is teaching organizations a lot about what's currently possible and where the limitations are and where some of the concerns are. So I would say those are the reasons why it's making a lot of noise. But as Cheyenne said, we're not quite there in terms of like something that is really autonomous and can do, a lot of things.
I'd like to get slightly more into the potential and the challenges. And I read a statistic, I think Gartner said that about 40% of, so-called agentic projects are going to be cancelled by 2027 because they just don't work well enough. But of course, that means that about 60% are probably going to continue. So I'd like just to tease out what works, what doesn't work. I wonder, Rachel, could we just start with just like raw capabilities? Like if you had to summarize in plain terms, like really help us get a crisp sense of today with the current technology, what kinds of things can agents do? And just as importantly, what's really out of reach for now? What can't they do?
Really, I would say the probably number one use case around at the moment is around knowledge management, right? Or creating drafting documents. So we have this use case where we worked with this, large pharma organization in R&D, and a big part of what they have to do is they have to create documentation for regulators where they link to all the studies, and you can just imagine the amount of data that they're dealing with there. And so they built out different agents for the research aspect. So again, like one key use case that works is like retrieving information, summarizing it, drafting documentation, drafting templates, breaking things into tasks, and anything that's kind of repetitive and well known is pretty kind of straightforward in the agent world. I think where it's less capable is maybe not less capable, but where there's challenges is the cross-platform interoperability. So yeah, we do have agent to agent and MCP, but it's super early, and there's no guarantee that those are going to be the standards that we kind of stick with, and there's still things that need to be figured out in that space. I think there's issues if you don't have, the human in the loop at the right place. The results aren't always the best quality. And I know that one of the things I say to people all the time is if you want to see how good these things are, use it for your job where you're an expert and see what result you get. And then you can be like, wow, that's way off, right? And I would say that 60-40 is probably about right, where I'm like, yeah, about 60% of the time the result's pretty good. It drafted me something pretty useful. And then, a lot of the time I'm like, that's just nonsense and that makes no sense. And then you'll tell it, that's nonsense, and it'll come back and say, yeah, you're right, right? So it's so I think it's getting there. But there are latency issues, there are cost issues associated with it. We don't have, great kind of long-term memory. There's context related issues. So, I always recommend starting with quite a well-scoped workflow that you can trust. And you're also comfortable with the output being non-deterministic, so that you can learn. So because I think to Cheyenne's point earlier, to get to the stage where it is truly an agent, there's a lot of learning along the way. And I think some of these And I normally I wouldn't say like get involved with all the vendors, but I'm like they have a lot of things out of the box that people can start learning with and start building, fairly simplistic workflows, or get even more complex workflows. But having a clear scope with clear human in the loop points where you can say this is doing what I expect it to do. Because I think about it, I know you mentioned not anthropomorphizing them, but I think about it as like an overeager, like graduate, like fresh out of university, that's very keen to do stuff, can take a lot of actions, but might not always get the best result. And then you need to train it and tune it to get to a better result, right? By providing better context and better prompts. And so it's getting there, but it's not at the stage where we could just have, a large multi-purpose agent at this point.
I mean, some of the limitations that you guys have raised, I mean, two in particular, which is the error rate and also the security vulnerabilities, like prompt injection in particular, where, like a large language model, one of the limitations of the architecture is it can't distinguish between data it's analyzing and an instruction. And so, malicious actors can hide prompts in documentation that an agent might be looking at, or there's a huge security vulnerability there. And taken together, like those two things, like for most businesses, if you say, well, you can have this tool, but by the way, it's really quite unreliable and it's quite unsafe, they'd say, well, I don't really want anything to do with that. So businesses that are adopting agents to do, the kind of the more ambitious businesses that are saying we're putting these things in all kinds of processes, what are they doing to work around those things? Or are they just massively constrained in practice by what they can actually do with agents within their risk tolerance? Like, what does that actually look like on the ground? I mean, Cheyenne, what's your take?
Yeah, so there's a pragmatic answer and then there's a deeply technical answer, right? And these are kind of like parallel tracks. So the pragmatic answer is the way businesses are implementing agentic AI today is by, again, like limiting the blast radius. So to Rachel's point, you've got this overeager fresh grad. You wouldn't immediately give that person direct unfettered access to the corporate bank account and allow them to manage all transactions for the business, So people are thinking about agents in kind of a similar way. Again, trying not to anthropomorphize these things, but practically speaking, it's, limiting use cases, limiting the blast radius, what they're allowed to access, what they're not allowed to access, which then gets into a whole bunch of like fairly interesting technical questions at various levels. Like, how do you think about authentication and authorization as it relates to agents? Do they inherit from the people that are authorizing access? If the CEO is running some agents, do those agents also inherit the level of permissions that the CEO has? Or are they themselves actors within a system that need to be governed in a specific way? How do you think about that? That then points to the evolution of like authorization systems more broadly. How do you think about non-human actors in your systems that are also not just highly constrained pieces of software, things that should be able to go across systems, but done in a somewhat limited way. As we start getting into some of the limitations, there's a couple things that we've seen as patterns. The first is the prevalence of inbuilt memory. That is a non-trivial problem. And there are a lot of different approaches to how people are treating long-term context retrieval or management, really. Then you get into kind of like prompt injection, you start getting into guardrails, you start getting into that sort of world. And even there, the solutions today are either fairly brittle or often it's hard to reason about where trust starts and ends in that sort of system, right? So you kind of have to trade between the two as of today. So there are new techniques that are coming up, and that means that these things are maturing at various levels, at various paces, but all in parallel. It's all pointing in the direction of these agents becoming more and more useful, more and more powerful over some period of time. At some point, these techniques are all going to mature at a pace that makes sense for an enterprise. Today, the best, most practical way to actually implement these things is just limit the blast radius. Think about the external systems that you're using to govern the system, and just kind of run from there.
Are you a gambling man? Do you have any predictions for how quickly some of these kind of basis problems like error propagation, lack of memory, lack of multimodality, talking about the difficulty of getting them to run between different systems. Do you think this is something we're solving in the next like 2 years, or is this kind of like a decade out?
No, I like so I will couch this by saying every single one of my time estimates has been wrong by a significant factor. We're in kind of a rare situation right now. Like at the moment, this one topic is taking up a significant portion of the mind share of the entire world across every sector, across every segment. And this topic of AI more broadly has commanded trillions of dollars of investment over the course of basically 2 years, right? We have not seen this type of behavior before in the same like magnitude. So I'll say that like based on that, and based on kind of like the requirements being imposed on that investment, we cannot be looking at decades long maturity curves. We have to look at something shorter. How short? I don't know. It could be in the order of like a couple months, could be a year, could be 2 years.
Rachel, in the business world of today, like when you talk to clients, when you see what they're doing, when you help them with things yourself, what are the kinds of categories of use cases where agents, as they are now, are best deployed? I mean, just to help everyone sort of get a handle on it, could you sort of break it down into like the basic kind of camps, the basic buckets that good use cases tend to fall into? I mean, you mentioned coding and software development. That's obviously one big area. How does it kind of split out?
Yeah, and it's more of the simplistic use cases for sure, right? Because this is where people have confidence and they can put in the appropriate guardrails and the appropriate firewalls and obfuscation and things like that, where they can keep, their data close and not have agents running around doing way too many things or being able to access external content or make call like be at risk of prompt injection, essentially. And I would say, going back to the example I talked about in the pharma space, right? Research and synthesis. I mean, I'm using this on a daily basis myself. It's good at that. Probably about 60% of the time. It's drafting content, right? So helping you draft, those tedious reports or, the RFPs is a really common one for us. Nobody likes filling out an RFP, but they're constantly flying around the industry. So everybody's doing them all the time, whether it's, something for compliance or regulation, a report for your boss, your yearly appraisal, you name it, right? Anything that's kind of around drafting content. I think like cleaning data, writing queries, so things in the data analytics space. And then, of course, the workflow orchestration, right? Starting with simple kind of multi-step things, right? And I think in some ways, you could kind of call a lot of things workflow orchestration. Even the software delivery lifecycle stuff, a lot of it is kind of workflow orchestration. But bounded within certain processes. And then those are the things that, I would say people are doing now that work and that enables an organization to learn how to do this well. And most organizations are doing that with the out of the box agents, but some are building custom as well. But yeah, I would say those are the kind of the key buckets where they're doing it, they're deploying them, and they're seeing pretty good results.
I'd love to know what other real world examples you've seen of agents delivering like clear, measurable return on investment for businesses. Like, where have you seen them? Can you talk about specific examples where you've seen them have a real impact?
The use cases in software development are kind of immense, right? Especially in the greenfield space. So if you think about, I actually saw something the other day, it kind of blew my mind. But when people first got started, like I said, it was just code generation on steroids. But now people have basically built kind of like a planning agent, like the principal level developer or the tech lead agent that's orchestrating the team to do various things, right? So it has the developer, it has the QA, it has the code review one, right? And it has the one that does the Jira tickets, right? And so suddenly you've got a tech lead that has lots of agents building out a system, and they didn't hit limitation. I mean, certainly there's huge cost associated with that from a token perspective. They didn't hit limitations until they hit like millions of lines of code. And bear in mind, now you've just got one person orchestrating and building out a system that would normally have taken teams and teams of like large numbers of teams months, right? And we've seen timelines of literally something that would have taken, I don't know, 60 people 6 months, take 5 people 6 weeks.
Shine, what about you? What is the most sophisticated, ambitious deployment that you've seen that's not just like some little sandboxed experiment, but is actually being used?
We helped a company that is very well known um, build a fleet of agents that were like in real time managing a massive number of deployed devices, like on the order of several tens of millions of these devices across many different data centers around the world. And this was like not just doing health checks and that sort of thing, but like managing kind of large scale deployments of large quantities of these devices to individual end users, making sure that if there is an outage, like root cause analysis was done on that particular analysis or on that outage, and then shown at the right time to the right set of humans, remediated in real time as well. This was a pretty huge undertaking. But this was something that I believe they still have running today, and is managing like, billions of dollars of equipment globally, with very little human involvement.
Brilliant. Thanks, Shine. I'd like to go back for the end of the session to some sort of practical advice for leaders in companies. I mean, in the report we put together, you guys were saying like, yeah, sure, there's complexity and nuance around agents, but you were pretty unequivocal that you don't want to get left behind with this, even if it's still a nascent space. So, if you are talking to a business leader that is thinking of dipping their toe in the water, are there any kind of key do's and don'ts which you think are often underestimated or overlooked by business?
You still need to have, clean data, right? Garbage in, garbage out is a real thing. So if you've just got if you don't have a great data set, whether it's structured or unstructured, you're not going to get necessarily great results. And then you need to start learning around the guardrails around this, right? So the authentication, the permissions, observability is critical. One of the things we're seeing actually is as clients use this, observability cost goes up, right? Because you want to make sure because it's non-deterministic, what is the agent doing? How can I make sure it's doing the kinds of things I expect? And then, get past the novelty aspect and just think about what do you want to measure here, right? Is it cycle time? Is it throughput? Is it quality? Like, what are the metrics that you're going to put around these agents to make sure that they're hitting the results that you expect? But as we said in the report, you can't wait. Yes, there's still a lot of things to solve for, especially when it comes to very complex workflows and multi-agent systems and things like that. And but waiting and seeing is not a good strategy at this point.
Kind of some statements that I think I can make pretty confidently right now is that every new enterprise application that companies are building today for internal use have some component of intelligence to them, right? They are at some level being powered in some small way or in some large way by a language model or a model of some sort. So that's sort of like statement number one. And statement number two is that if you believe that, then you also have to consider an intelligence layer of some sort as a fundamental part of your enterprise architecture. You have to think about, where are you getting your tokens from? Is it from a vendor? Is it from OpenAI or Anthropic or one of those other players? Is it self-hosted? If so, why? Are you doing some combination of the two? Then you go up a layer and you think about, okay, if all of my enterprise applications from here on out are going to have some element of intelligence to them, how do I allow that intelligence to have access to the systems it needs to in order to do its job effectively? And so now you start thinking about tooling in protocols like MCP into your data layers, into your tools layers. You think about, do I need to have an orchestration layer, for these agents? Do I need to start thinking about stuff like LangGraph or LangChain as sort of like a fundamental part of my enterprise software architecture? And then how am I surfacing that to users? Like, who are the users here? How do I think about the experiences that they're deriving out of this? Is it going to be chat only? Should I also be thinking about voice? Should I be thinking about reusable UI components across these applications? So what's interesting is that across pretty much every industry, across every type of company, across every size of company, we're seeing roughly the same philosophical stack, let's say, emerge. Everyone is thinking about all of those elements, usually in disparate ways. What we're saying is like actually tie it all together. Like there is a new enterprise stack that is emerging. And if you want to de-risk, your investment into AI, if you don't want to sort of bet the farm on it, think about the layers at first principles. Think about how do you tool in the right capabilities, the right legibility into each of these layers independently, so that as the technology improves over time, you are ready to just drop that in, right? And you can keep evolving with it without having to completely re-engineer everything all the time.
I think the other thing that organizations need to start thinking about is how their systems are going to get accessed by agents. And I think it's blindsiding organizations, right? They don't know how to respond, or, there's some kind of denial of service when the agent actually tries to do something. And so all of our systems, all of our UIs, I mean, everything we build is designed for humans, right? As opposed to agents. So I do think that that's a fundamental thing that people have to think about.
There's obviously quite a big gap between like using agents for doing these very kind of specific things that we know they're quite good at, like software development, knowledge management. Between that and the idea that agents are basically going to completely rewire the enterprise, they'll be the new kind of like scaffolding for the enterprise. To get from here to there, presumably that's about solving those core problems we spoke about, right? So if you're taking that kind of bet, you are betting we're going to solve those basis challenges. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I mean, Cheyenne's nodding. I would say yes. You're assuming that, but there's still use cases now that you're able to do without solving some of those more complex challenges, right? Because those more complex challenges are more around like bigger systems, more agent, like an agent farm kind of scenario where you've got lots of them running around, agents operating inside and outside, internal and external systems, like all of these things that right now we're like, oh, that's very risky. We need to, we have to figure out how to put the guardrails around it. Solving those problems that will allow you to have like a much more complex, like enterprise-wide internal and external agent landscape. But even without that, building out the current architectural components to support what you can currently do, I think is important. And then you're building from that, really.
So we're coming to the end of the session. I just wanted to wrap up by asking you, if someone came to you and said, look, I'm really interested in this. I've read a bunch of things. I've spoken to colleagues about it. I want to get involved in agents. What is the one piece of advice, the highest value piece of advice that you could offer them? Cheyenne, do you want to come in on that?
It's not just about the agent. It's about the agentic system. And so you have to think about how the agent should work with all the other things it needs to work with in order to perform the job it's meant to do.
Rachel, how about you?
Yeah, I was probably going to say a similar thing in a different way, which is you should absolutely get started, but you should get started with your eyes open in terms of how it fits into your architecture, right? Which then rolls into the things that Cheyenne talked about in terms of like, how's it going to interact with other systems? How are you going to secure it? How are you going to observe it? How are you going to make sure that it doesn't, incur lots of excessive costs, have kill switches, ability to roll back, all of those architectural guardrails that we would recommend for any new program that you would put in your system, but especially in the agent space. But the most important one is don't wait, right? You have to get started with this stuff because there's value to be had today. And that's going to increase over time as we start to solve some of these more complex and more challenging problems.
I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. It's been a really helpful session. Thank you both so much for doing such a great job of clearing up some of the fog around this topic. Rachel, Cheyenne, really appreciate you both sparing the time to be here today, sharing your expertise. And thank you to our audience for joining us. We hope you found it useful. Please do go to wired.com and read the full report, which is live now. And we'll see you next time.